Shalawam, and welcome back to The Hidden Chosen. I am Hadassah Saiwan, and welcome back to a new teaching that I have here called Under Law or Under Grace. It is a question. So, what we're going to do is take a look at what the law is in comparison to what the comparison to what grace is to determine whether we are under law or under grace. And if you have been following along in my studies, you will understand where I'm headed because there's not one or the other. Spoiler alert. Okay, so in this part one, we're going to take a deep look at what is the law, and this is going to have two parts to it because I'm trying to keep these studies a little shorter because of the issues still with this computer. And so, to get all the slides showing up and no bits and pieces being chopped out, I will try to keep these messages, these studies a little shorter. All right? So, let's get started. Excuse me. Too many times we have heard from church leaders that we are no longer under law, but under grace. And this is something, if you have come up in the church or if you've started going to church, you will hear the pastors and all the different leaders reiterating this message that we are not under law, but we are under grace. And this idea comes from Paul's epistle called the Book of Romans. And this is found in chapter 6, verses 14 and 15, where it was laid out. This is where he said that you are not under law, but under grace. And this is where they get their idea from, this idea from about law versus grace. All right, from this false teaching. And that's why I do not subscribe to any of Paul's epistles. All right. There's a lot of discrepancies, a lot of error. When you look at the Tharawah and you see exactly where the Most High Yahawah has laid out His word clearly for His people, and then you have someone called Paul come and tell you, well, no, 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 you don't need to be under the law because you are now under grace. All right? And now people use that as an excuse to break the law of Alahayam. And when I say law, I'm talking about the commandments, the judgments, the statutes. I'm giving it an umbrella word called law. All right? So people then go ahead and break the commandments and they will recite what this person who called himself or who is called Paul says in these two verses. All right? As a way to excuse their sin. They're living in sin, but now grace and claiming that I'm under grace, not under law, is now my remedy. I don't have to do anything but keep on living as I am. Keep on doing as I want to do. Breaking the laws, breaking the commandments, breaking the statutes and the judgments. And it's all okay because Paul says, okay. But what did Alahayam Yahawah say? All right. It is because of this erroneous teaching that many ignore the law because they were led to believe that grace has overshadowed the law. And this is a very damaging and destructive heresy for many people today. You hear mainly Christians with this teaching, with this false teaching. And that's why they can go and eat pig and shellfish and live their lives as if nothing matters. You see them on their channels and they're full of tattoos. Although we see in the law that the Most High, Yahweh, said, don't you mark up your skin. That's what the Gentiles do. And they do it according to their gods and what their gods tell them to do, what their demons tell them to do. When someone looks at you and see that you're full of tattoos, what do you think is going through that person's head? How are you any different from the people around you that are Gentiles, that are heathens? If you want to be different, you got to look different. You got to be different. You got to act different. You have to speak different. You can't behave like the people around you and claim that grace is going to cover you. So therefore now you have a place before the Most High. You have a place in His kingdom. Then that would mean that the Most High is not true to His word, because only the righteous will make it. All right, let's read on. If we can understand what the law is, and I am using the singular noun to describe a collection of divine laws and commandments, then we will see that this teaching about the law versus grace is false, all lies and deception. Let us understand what the law is that is being denied its rightful place in our lives. This is what the enemy wants. He wants us to deny the law, deny its effect in our lives, because when we live the law, it means that our lives are going to be transformed. You're going to see that in a little while. But when you deny the law, then you are going to live in sin. Because the only way you can determine sin in your life is because of the law. The law said, do not tell falsehood, do not lie. But if you are a liar and you love to tell lies and you're not convicted because of what the law says, then you will continue on to be a liar. Same thing with committing adultery. If you like sleeping around, the law says don't do that. Be faithful to your spouse. But if you determine that, well, hey, I'm not under this law anymore, I'm under grace, so that means now I have the green light to go ahead and live as I want to live, sleeping with whomever. All right? So this is what the enemy wants for us to do, to deny the law being effective in our lives. Now, we're going to talk about something in a little while, because we of ourselves cannot live the law as we ought to be living. But Alahayam Yahawah has made a way. He made a way for our forefathers, and today He made the perfect way for us to be able to do it, to live the law. Okay, let's read on. So let us understand what the law is that is being denied its rightful place in our lives. The first time the law of Alahayam was revealed was in the book of Shalawam, that's the book of Exodus, where Masha, who's Moses, the deliverer of Habani Yashwa'al, meaning the children of Yashwa'al, was called up the mount called Sinai or Horeb to receive this law in the form of the 10 Commandments and the other laws pertaining to priestly conduct, personal conduct, and cleansing rituals, all grouped together, and I call it the law. So if you hear me saying singular law, that I'm talking about the fullness of the all the 10 Commandments, the other laws pertaining to our personal conduct, priestly conduct, and yes, the cleansing rituals, which we know we no longer need those cleansing rituals, which came in the form of the sacrifices of animals, yet there is still one sacrifice that we need to acknowledge. Okay? The word law is thawara, in our language called oberai. It means divine instruction or teaching or legal directive. So it is a teaching, it is the teaching, the instruction from Alahayam Yahawah on how we ought to live in order to be his people. The first 5 books seen in the Bible are called the Thawara, or books of divine instructions, and they are starting with Genesis, Bara'ashayaf, which means in the beginning. Then we have Exodus, which is Shamawaf, which means departure. Leviticus, which is Vayagara'a, which means and he called and he spoke. And this is the book of priestly instructions. Numbers, which is Bamadabar, means in the wilderness. Deuteronomy, which is Debarayam, means words. If you put these 5 books together to form a sentence, they will read like this. In the beginning, there was a departure, and he called, meaning, and he spoke in the wilderness. Words, his words. We see from the meanings of these 5 books all that Alahayam had intended to do for his people, Yashwa'al. Sorry, let me read that again. We see from the meanings of these 5 books all that Alahayam had intended to do for his people. Yashwa'al did not become Yashwa'al, the people of Alahayam, in the land of Matsarayam, but in the wilderness, after he led them out of the land of bondage. That's Matsarayam. They only became a people when they were in the wilderness. So you see, those 5 books that I have just explained, they are telling the story about Alahayam, what he did in the beginning in order to raise up a people who will be called by his name. And he did it when they were in the wilderness. He led them to his mountain where he gave them his laws, his commandments, judgments, and statutes. It was by his people, our forefathers, who chose to obey all that Alahayam Yahawah had instructed them to do through his law, that they became a people unto him. Without the law, meaning his words, it was impossible for our forefathers called Yashwa'al to be a nation, let alone to be the people of Alahayam Yahawah. The law of Alahayam defined Habanai Yashwa'al, meaning the children of Yashwa'al, which transformed them, meaning the law, talking about the commandments, the statutes, and the judgments, and the laws. They transformed them into a holy nation and a peculiar people, unlike any other nation around them. It was also the law that led Habanai Yashwa'al to be able to be in covenant with Yahawah and for him to declare them as his people and he their Alahayam. Without the law, this could not have happened. It was because of the law that the people, the tribes, the 12 tribes of Yashwa'al that came out of Matsarayam were now becoming, or they became the people, the nation of people for Yahawah. All right, they became his people and he became their Alahayam, and that is covenant. So without the law, there will be no covenant. And you can't say, well, I'm a covenant, but I'm not keeping the law. I'm not keeping his commandments. I'm not keeping his laws. All right. Can't. Let's look at Shalawam, chapter 19, verse 3. And Masha went up unto Alahayam, and Yahawah called unto him out of the mountain, saying, Thus shall you say to the house of Yaakov, and tell HaMashayach, You have seen what I did unto Matzorayim, and how I bear you on eagle's wings, and brought you unto myself. Now therefore, if you will obey my voice indeed, and keep my covenant, then you shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people. What did he tell them? He said, I brought you unto myself. It was me who delivered you. I sent my servant Masha to deliver you, to bring you out. But it was by my hand that you were set free from bondage. He said, Now if you will obey my voice, obey my words, and keep my covenant, because of the words that I have spoken unto you, which were his laws, his commandments, his statutes, and his judgments. He said, Then you will be what? A peculiar treasure unto me above all other people. For all the earth is mine. Verse 6. And you shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And that's why we saw in the previous slide that the book of Leviticus it was given to the priest for their instructions. It was their instructions because we are to be as priests. Yes, he had established the priesthood in the wilderness in order to carry out all the different rituals to preserve his people. But now we have a new covenant, a new way, where now we all are priests unto him once we obey his laws, once we walk in his commandments. It's for everyone. It's not only for the tribe of Levi, the tribe of Lewi. It is for all of us. We are all called to be priests unto Alahayam Yahawah and to serve him as priest. All right? These are the words. Let me read verse 6 again. And you shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak unto HaMashayach. And Masha came and called for the elders of the people and laid before their faces all these words which Yahawah commanded him. And all the people answered together and said, All that Yahawah has spoken, we will do. And Masha returned the words of the people unto Yahawah. So the people were willing to accept the conditions, which were the laws, the commandments, the statutes, and the judgments that Alahayam Yahawah was going to give to them. He already had given to them, or he will give to them. He was going to give to them, rather. Starting with the 10 commandments. Then Masha was going to go up to the mountain, have those 10 commandments written in stone, meaning they cannot be changed. He was also going to be given all the different the judgments and the statutes and all the different rituals for the sacrifices, all the different things that they needed to have in order to be cleansed and live righteously and in holiness before him. All right? These are his words. Let's look at the Barayam chapter 14. That's the book of Deuteronomy chapter 14 verse 1. You are Habanai, meaning the children of Yahawah Alahayakam. That is your Alahayam, plural, talking about the congregation. You shall not cut yourselves, nor make any baldness between your eyes for the dead. So there's some pagan rituals where you have to cut yourself up, or put a tattoo in your skin, or people will pull their hair out or make their heads bald, and that between your eyes, meaning it's almost like you're developing like a bald spot in front of your head. Well, no, what these people do is they shave that bald spot off on behalf of the person they are grieving for. And the Most High said not to do that. Do not make yourself bald. Don't do anything for the dead. The dead are exactly that. They're dead. Don't do anything in memory of them. I've known people that someone that they love died and they went and got a tattoo on behalf of that person. The Most High said not to do that. Do not mark your skins for the dead. Don't mark your skin. Don't mark yourself, period. All right? All right, let's read on. Verse 2. For you are a holy people unto Yahawah Alahayach, and that Alahayach is your Alahayam, singular, personal. And Yahawah has chosen you to be a peculiar people unto himself above all the nations that are upon the earth. So out of all the people that are on the earth, Yahawah has selected a particular people to be his own, and he has given to them his laws, his commandments, his statutes, and his judgments, so that they can live in accordance to how he is, to be holy and to be righteous. All right? If you think that you can be holy and righteous without the law, without the words of Alahayam, you are wrong. All right? Let's look at 1 Peter, 1 Ka'apa'at, chapter 2, verse 9. But you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people, that you should show forth the praises of him who has called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Because we were once a people in darkness without him. When he comes into our lives, then he leads us to his laws, to tell us how we ought to be living to maintain our relationship with him, called a covenant. All right? Let's read on. Verse 10, which in time past were not a people, but now the people of Alahayam, which had not obtained mercy, but now obtain mercy. So we will address this mercy later on in the section when we look at grace, because mercy came to us through HaMashayach. When he died and he was raised again on the third day, mercy was released, and that is the part of grace that people don't seem to understand. All right? This is what Ka'apa'a is speaking about. All right? Grace that was released onto us. Because before we did not have grace. We did not have the mercy. We had to do things ritualistically by the sacrifices that we had to offer. And we had to do them often because the sin, once we made the correct sacrifices for our sins, it was only able to cover it for that moment. And then when the people continued to sin, then they had to go and do this thing over again and over again. But today we don't need to do that because we have, okay, I'm going ahead of myself. We have the Son of Alahayam who has done it all for us once and for all. But that doesn't mean that we are no longer sinning, but the remission for our sins. Once we repent, the sin is cleansed. We are given a clean slate. All right, let's go on. Without the law, meaning the instruction of Yahawah, HaMashayach would not have been a peculiar treasure or a holy nation. How can you be holy without the law? The law is like a magnifying glass and a light that highlights sin in our lives, because it tells you what righteousness is, what holiness is, and what is missing from your life, or what is hiding in your life that is not supposed to be there. And it also tells you how to get rid of it. All right. Therefore, this goes to show the great importance of having the law and obeying the law in order to be Yahweh's peculiar treasure and to be holy in his eyes. Granted that the laws of Yahawah came with the rituals of the sacrifices of animals, which had to be done often, but later on these sacrifices were replaced by one major and monumental sacrifice, and that was by the death of Yahweh's son called HaMashayach. This then became the turning point for Yashwa'al, his people, to choose whether to hold on to the old covenant determined by the law, which of itself was imperfect. Speaking of the old covenant was imperfect because the law that governed it, the sacrifices, yes, the law that governed it can only be upheld by the blood of animals. All right? Or to switch to the new covenant, which is still determined by the same law. It is the same law. It is not the law that is imperfect, but it was the covenant. The old covenant was imperfect because of what the people had to do in order to keep the law, which would be the blood of animals, to sacrifice the animals. But now the new covenant is perfected by the blood of HaMashayach. And because the new covenant is perfected, it means now that we can walk in perfection in the laws, commandments, statutes, and judgments of Alahayam Yahawah. Okay? Obarai, the book of Hebrews, chapter 8, verse 7. For if that first covenant had been faultless, that's talking about the old covenant now, then should no place have been sought for the second. So even here we are seeing in the word, these are not my words. This is the word of Alahayam spoken through his servant. All right? The first covenant was faulty. It was imperfect. And that's why there had to be a second one. For by finding fault with them, meaning the people who had to uphold the old covenant, he said, behold, the days come, says Yahawah, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Yashwa'al and with the house of Yahawah. Now we're talking about two kingdoms here. We're talking about the northern kingdom, which is the house of Yashwa'al, and we're talking about the southern kingdom, which is the house of Yahawah. So he's going to deal with each kingdom on their own with this new covenant, starting with the southern kingdom of Yahawah. Verse 9. Not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day when I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Mizraim. So he's not talking about the old covenant days when he led the people into the wilderness from Mizraim, because they continue not in my covenant and I regarded them not. So even with all that he had laid in place, they still rebelled against him. And they broke his covenant, says Yahawah. Verse 10. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Yashwa'al after those days, after the old covenant days. says Yahweh. I will put my laws into their minds and write them in their hearts. Now let's read that again, because according to Paul, we are not under law, we are under grace. Remember, those are the words of that false apostle, that false teaching that many people love to hold on to. And yet, in the new covenant, he is saying, I will put my laws into whose minds? His people's minds, and write them in their hearts. And I will be to them Alahayam, and they shall be to me a people. He's talking about covenant here, a new covenant. Verse 21. Verse 12. Verse 12. And they shall not teach every man. Actually, that is supposed to be verse 11. I'm so sorry. And they shall not teach every man his neighbor and every man his brother, saying, Know Yahweh, for all shall know me, from the least to the greatest. And I will be merciful to their unrighteousness. You see that word mercy is coming back again? And I will be merciful to their unrighteousness. Now let's stop there for a second and pause and think on this. Back in the old covenant days, when men committed certain sins, they were stoned to death because there was no mercy for that sin. And today, that same sin, the Most High now, Yahweh, He is merciful unto His people, that He will not require death to that person because of the blood of His Son. The blood of His Son released what we call mercy through grace. So now Yahweh is merciful unto us that commit the sins that called for death. All right, let's read verse 12 again. And I will be merciful to their unrighteousness because of this new covenant that I have made with them. And their sins and their iniquities will I remember no more. Now, does this give us the license to go and sin and commit and transgress His laws? No. Doesn't mean that we are free to go and sin. It simply means that the sins and the iniquities that once covered us, that once were in us, that when we come into the new covenant with Him, they will be remembered no more, because they will be permanently erased because of what HaMashayach did on the stake. All right? Verse 13. And in that He says, a new covenant He has made the first old, meaning the covenant that He had before with our forefathers in the wilderness. It's called old. Now that which decays and waxes old is ready to vanish away. It does not exist any longer. But many people still want to live under the old covenant because they do not want to believe in HaMashayach. And there's a big problem for people who choose to live under the old covenant, although we already have the new covenant in place. They will have no mercy. All right? And not only will they have no mercy, they are on the broad way to destruction, eternal destruction, because you have denied the one and only way to be redeemed, to receive the mercy of Alahayam Yahawah, to be in covenant with Alahayam Yahawah. You cannot separate the covenant of Alahayam from His law. The two are intertwined with each other. Therefore, when you hear of Yahweh speaking of his covenant with Habanah Yashwa'al, he is also speaking of a people who are living obediently according to his word, which is his law. Although the old covenant was imperfect, meaning that Habanah Yashwa'al had to repeatedly offer up blood sacrifices for the remission of their sins, yet it was sufficient for them at that time, and most importantly, their sacrifices were accepted by Yahweh because they were keeping his laws and living accordingly. This is then interpreted to mean that without the law, it was impossible for our forefathers to be in covenant with Alahayam. And as it was in their day, so it is the same in our day. We need the laws, statutes, commandments, and judgments of Yahweh in order to be in covenant with him. And there is no other way. He is seeking to be in covenant with the people he created, but people do not want to be in covenant with him based on how they want to live their lives. They want to carry on. They want to do everything that they see the people around them doing and use grace as an excuse to do so. The law governs our lives and transforms us to be priests, and rightfully so, as we are drawn into the presence of Alahayam to serve him there. The law helps us to discern sin in our lives and what we need to do to remove that. And at the same time, we cannot try to live the law under the old covenant. It's not possible because it will not be accepted by Alahayam. He already made a new way through his son's death and resurrection, through the shedding of his son's blood, his pure and holy blood. So he's not going to accept any old covenant ways. If you want to live that way, he's not going to accept it. Then you become legalistic. Sorry about that. Let's read on. The law of Yahweh can only be obeyed by first believing in the Son, who is HaMashayach. Who is HaMashayach, and what he did on the stake for our lives. HaMashayach has laid the foundation for us to be able to live the law successfully. And so our covenant with Yahweh will be faultless, will be perfect. Not perfect in the way how we think perfection is. It means complete. Proverbs chapter 7 verse 1. My son, keep my words and lay up my commandments with you. Keep my commandments and live, and my law as the apple of your eye. The law has to be the apple of our eye, the apple of our eye. All right? It has to be at the forefront of our minds. It has to be written on our hearts. Alahayam Yahawah said in the new covenant, he's going to place it in our minds and write it on our hearts so that we can't forget it, so that we cannot deviate from it and land in sin. Read on. Verse 3. Bind them upon your fingers, write them upon the tablet of your heart. Let's look at Yohanan, the book of John, chapter 15, verse 9. As Abba has loved me, so have I loved you. Continue in my love. So we're being introduced now to another attribute of Yahweh, love. We saw mercy being the new covenant. Now we're seeing love being a part of the new covenant. Not that he didn't love his people before when they were in the wilderness. In fact, he loved them even while they were living as slaves in Matzarayah. All right? But this now is a love that is beyond love, that beyond our comprehension of what love really is. This